The Shadow Man. By J.W. Steele. Dr. Victoria Holloway's office was an immaculate sanctuary of muted colors and understated elegance. The sunlight filtered through sheer drapes, casting soft golden patterns on the polished mahogany floor. Across from her, on the fainting couch, lay William Millstone, his gaunt frame hunched forward, eyes shadowed by years of sleepless torment. "Let's begin with last night," Dr. Holloway said, her voice a calm ripple in the silence. Her emerald-green eyes, soft yet penetrating, fixed on his face. William ran his trembling hands through his thinning hair. "The same as always. Hours of darkness. Endless nothingness," and then, he paused, his voice trailing into a whisper. "They come." "They?" Victoria leaned slightly forward, her brow furrowing just enough to show concern but not alarm. Victoria's pen hesitated midair. "Dreaming while conscious? That's a rare condition known as oneirophrenia. Have you observed anything different about these waking dreams recently?" He leaned back, his face pale and drawn. "Different?" His eyes darted to the window as if expecting to see some lurking presence beyond the glass. "They're becoming clearer. Like memories that aren't mine. Places I've never been. But they're so vivid, so real. And there's a pattern now, a man in shadows, watching me, waiting." "What does he say?" Victoria's voice remained even, but a flicker of unease crossed her face. "It's not words," William whispered. "It's hunger. As if he's devouring something precious. Like my dreams, doctor, I feel like this thing is eating my dreams." Victoria's pulse quickened. She had heard of chronic sleep deprivation inducing hallucinations, but William's case was unique. His delusions carried a metaphysical weight, an air of otherworldly menace. She carefully framed her next question. "William, when did this all begin? Was there a specific moment, a trigger?" His hollow eyes seemed to retreat further into his skull. "It started 10 years ago," he said slowly. "After my wife died. I couldn't sleep for days. And when I finally did, it felt like she was there. In my dreams. But then, the dreams stopped. She stopped." Victoria folded her hands in her lap. "And that's when the shadows began appearing?" "Yes," he rasped. "Like something took her place. Something darker." That night, Victoria couldn't shake the unease that had settled over her like a cold mist. She sat in her study, reviewing her notes under the warm glow of a desk lamp. William's descriptions, his vivid visions, and the shadowed man, nagged at her. They seemed to tap into an archetype buried deep in the collective unconscious. A Jungian shadow personified. She opened her laptop and began searching for patterns, psychological studies, folklore. The deeper she delved, the more she uncovered ancient accounts of dream eaters, spectral entities said to feed on the subconscious. She found obscure references in esoteric texts, the Book of the Veil, the Codex Somnus. Each described beings trapped between realms, sustained by human dreams. Her screen flickered briefly, and the room felt suddenly colder. She rubbed her arms, dismissing it as fatigue. But the thought lingered. What if William wasn't hallucinating? The next session, Victoria confronted William with her findings. "Have you ever heard of dream eaters?" He stared at her, unblinking. "No. Why would I be aware of them?" "They're a recurring motif in various cultures," she explained. "Beings that exist in a liminal state, feeding on the dreams of the living to sustain their own existence." He shook his head. "You're telling me my chronic insomnia is because of ghosts?" "Not ghosts," she corrected. "Perhaps entities from another plane of existence, something beyond our understanding. What if your inability to sleep is because they've tethered themselves to you, siphoning off your dreams?" William's laugh was sharp and bitter. "And how do I get rid of them?" Call an exorcist? I'm not suggesting this etiology is correct, she said gently. But exploring unconventional explanations could help us find a way forward. His eyes burned with a mixture of fear and hope. What do we do? We'll start with an experiment, she said. I want you to try lucid dreaming. If you can confront these entities in an altered state of awareness, perhaps you can reclaim control. That night, William lay on his bed, heart pounding. The lucid dreaming techniques Victoria had taught him felt like a futile gesture. But he closed his eyes and focused, willing himself into a dazed state of mind. The visions came swiftly, enveloping him in cold, oppressive silence. And then he saw him, the shadowed man, standing at the edge of his awareness. His form was indistinct, a mass of darkness with eyes that glowed faintly like dying embers. What do you want, dreamer? William shouted into the void. His voice echoed endlessly like a sound reverberating in a vast cavern. The figure tilted its head, a grotesque mimicry of human curiosity. Your dreams sustain us, it replied in a hollow voice. Without them, we fall back into the abyss. Then take them all and leave me be, he yelled, desperation cracking his voice. The shadowed man's form shifted, becoming more solid, more imposing. You misunderstand. We do not take. We are given. William felt a sudden weight on his chest, like invisible hands pressing down. The room around him distorted, folding in on itself. The shadow's voice reverberated through his skull. To dream is to live. To give is to die. Which will you choose? The next session, Victoria entered the therapy room and found William unresponsive in his chair. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling, his lips moving in a silent conversation as though caught trapped in a locked-in syndrome. William? She whispered, touching his arm. He blinked slowly, like one emerging from a coma. They showed me, he murmured. What lies beyond? Her stomach tightened. And what did you see? His gaze fixed to her, hollow and haunted. Eternal hunger. A void that can never be filled. They're not spirits, doctor. They're fragments of what we become when we lose ourselves to misery. Victoria's voice trembled. Is there any way to stop them? No, William said, his voice eerily calm. But they've made me an offer. I can join them. Or become their vessel. Before she could respond, he leaned forward, his face inches from hers. His voice dropped, to an octave below normal. You'll help me decide, won't you, Victoria? She tried to pull back, but her body felt heavy, her limbs unresponsive. His eyes glowed faintly, their ember-like hue drawing her into a trance. You've been so helpful, doctor, he murmured. Only you can understand my burden. Victoria's mind swirled with fragments of William's visions, a chaotic torrent of shadowy landscapes, ghostly faces, and a hunger that gnawed at her very essence. Her eyes blurred, and the room darkened as the shadows wrapped around her like tendrils. When the light returned, she sat motionless in her chair, her emerald eyes now dimmed, reflecting only the shadows that danced across the room. William stood, his smile eerily serene. Welcome to the void, doctor, he said softly, turning to leave, as the shadows consumed the tissues of her mind.